Hello friends, long time no see, and that is completely my fault. I apologize for not having posted in over 2 weeks at this point. Life has just been busy. Family, business, everything that could happen has happened, and I've not been making the time necessary to make the quality videos that I would like to for this channel. With all that said, I've been reading very consistently. I've actually finished a lot of books, been reading some bigger novels, and so that's what I want to talk about today is one, what I'm currently reading, two, what I have lined up for the rest of the year so you can maybe get some recommendations and things that you can read as well. We can discuss them, have that back and forth. And then three, my taste in books has changed a lot lately, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But with all that said, let's start off with what I'm currently reading. So lately, the past maybe like 6 to 8 months, I've had this consistent schedule of reading a more philosophical or more challenging book in the morning because I have less distractions. It's kind of built into my morning routine of breakfast and brewing coffee, and I'll just kind of read for about like an hour, maybe a little bit over, while I sip my coffee, read a few minutes later. And that just gives me quiet time. I get up pretty early. It's a quiet time to really focus because a lot of these philosophical works require a lot of focus and brain power and notes and all of that, right? So usually I'll read for about an hour, maybe up to 90 minutes in the morning. And then lately I've been fitting in a kind of more relaxing or easier read, typically fiction, some kind of literature, midday, around like 12 or 1 o'clock. I work from home, so I kind of just use that as like a little break, give my mind a break from work, read a fun novel, something that's not as stressful, as I mentioned, as a philosophical text. However, I'll say I've been off that a little bit. I've actually transitioned to reading a more heavy, long-winded novel in the morning and then more of a philosophical work midday. So with all that said, the book I've been reading in the morning that's taken up a lot of my life lately has been Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace. And if you guys have followed the channel for a bit, you know I really like David Foster Wallace. I actually made a video kind of centered all about him, but specifically his concept of choice and awareness that he talks about a lot in his This Is Water speech, as well as in his book, The Pale King, which was the first David Foster Wallace book I read. Since then, I've listened to kind of every interview on YouTube. I've read some other little excerpts of his work, but I figured it was time. I had to pick up his magnum opus, his fat, thick book here, Infinite Jest, his kind of claim to fame in a way, although he has a lot of works that have some fame. But Infinite Jest is his most popular work. It's, I believe, on some top 100 books ever list. It has a lot of steam rolling behind it. So I was like, as long as it is, I gotta make the time for it. I gotta dig deep and yeah, get into it. So that's what I've done. It's about 1,000 pages, and I'm currently at 639, and I started reading it maybe like 2.5 weeks ago. So actually, I've been making a good pace. I've been happy about that. But to talk about the book specifically, it is a hilarious book. It is filled with satire about the overconsumption of entertainment and technology in this world. I mean, David Foster Wallace, in my opinion, is a genius. I think some people find him very verbose. They find him very pretentious in some ways, and I can see that. I get it, but I find him to just be truly a genius, truly comical. You see it in his other works as well. He's a very funny guy. His characters are hilarious, the things they do, and it makes it a very enjoyable read while also getting some of those more serious, deep meanings that leave you just ruminating. So in this book, like I mentioned, David explores society, he explores relationships, our relationships specifically with drugs and drug abuse, depression, the banality of life, and how just superficial a lot of things are. Again, our obsession and fixation on pleasure and this, unlimited pursuit of happiness, which I found to be a pretty interesting concept. And I never really thought about that, especially in America. It's one of the main principles of our Constitution, right? Is this pursuit of happiness, but should that pursuit be limitless? Should we have an endless pursuit of happiness, or should there be restrictions? It's a pretty interesting concept, as well as a lot of fascinating concepts in this book. There's one scene that's really captivating where you really get an insight of depression, and a lot of David Foster Wallace's life bleeds into this book and his characters. So if you're in it for the long haul, if you are interested in getting into David Foster Wallace, I think this book has been phenomenal. I can't wait to continue to read it and finish it. If you are looking for a shorter read, you can start with some of his speeches, his interviews, his essays. We'll talk about it in a minute, but he has a book kind of with a collection of his essays. You can start there with a little bit of a shorter read, but overall, been loving this. This has been my morning book. I've been getting lost in it, especially when I first started reading it. I found myself just picking it up over and over again, skipping my afternoon book and just picking this up again. Again, not for everybody, but really enjoyed it so far. And then the second book I'm reading in the afternoon is the Book of Disquiet by Fernando Pessoa. And really funny story about this book. I was recommended this in one of my comment sections a few months ago. And I looked it up and I was like, this seems kind of interesting. The author seems a little fascinating, had good ratings on Goodreads. It's like, sure. So I threw it on my to be read. And then a couple weeks ago, I had some Amazon order and I was like, let me just throw this on there. And I'm so glad I did. This book is truly one of a kind. This writer is truly one of a kind. I don't even really know where to begin. So a little bit about Pessoa. He is a Portuguese writer. He passed away in 1935. He was born in the late 1800s. Grew up, he was born in Portugal, but then he mostly grew up in South Africa and then moved back to Portugal and spent the rest of his life there. And very fascinating character because he was very isolated his whole life. He's rumored to be a virgin his whole life. And he wrote through heteronyms, which I believe is a concept that he created. And it's not just writing anonymously through a different name, but writing through these fictional characters that all have their own distinct name, beliefs, behaviors, attitudes, philosophies, all these different things. So you get these very diverse and interesting perspectives, but Pessoa himself is all of these characters. And so he developed these at a young age, continued to write through these, and he wrote his whole life. Yet, unfortunately, he only published, I think, a few small books when he was alive. But his writings, including the writings that are in this book, were discovered 47 years after his death in the 80s. And they were found in this trunk that was just sitting there with these incredible ideas. And thank God they were found, and then, they're still currently being edited and slowly published today, supposedly. So that alone is a fascinating story. But Pessoa was the introvert of introverts. He kept to himself. He was very lonely, and you see that in this book. There's a lot of pain. There's a lot of sorrow. There's a lot of focus on loneliness, on relationships, on society, on meaning, on individualism, on the paradoxes and contradictions of life, how absurd it is. I actually think this is a fair kind of pairing book or companion to some of Camus' ideas of the absurd. So again, I'm not too deep into it, so I can't speak on a deep level, but this book has been a joy to read. It's beautifully written. I think Pessoa is so underrated. I'm surprised I haven't heard more about him. So hopefully this is me extending that olive branch to you to buy this book and to read Pessoa, just like someone who commented on my video. All that to say, loving this book, loving Infinite Jest. That's what I'm currently reading. And both will probably take me a little bit longer, but soon I'll be picking up some of these other books. So let me tell you about what I've currently bought and what I plan to read in the near future. First up are two books I found at a local bookstore that I already had on my list, but fortunately found them barely used, and so I could get them cheaper than Amazon. And that is David Foster Wallace, Consider the Lobster. It's a collection of some of his essays. Again, same funny satirical style, criticism of modern culture and consumerism and all that. So again, I've really enjoyed his writing and a lot of his thoughts and perspectives. So excited to dig more into it within this book. And then the other one I picked up is Hannah Arendt's Eichmann in Jerusalem. It basically is her perspective and report on Adolf Eichmann, who is a German Nazi leader, and it's kind of her perspective on the trial that was taking place in 1963. Hannah Arendt herself is Jewish and then from German descent, so it's a pretty fascinating perspective. I know specifically from some podcasts I've listened to that Hannah Arendt doesn't demonize Martin Heidegger, for his involvement with the Nazi Party. She still values his ideas, so it very much connects to the video I just posted about how do you make this distinction between art and artist? How do you appreciate the ideas and the genius of someone like Martin Heidegger, but denounce some of his personal beliefs or behaviors? So really excited to dig into Hannah Arendt and get some more female philosophers on my shelf. I need to also get Simone de Beauvoir as well, but for now, Hannah Arendt will do. And then I picked up 2 others lately from one of my favorite philosophers, if not my favorite, Friedrich Nietzsche. So I got The Birth of Tragedy, which was his first published work, and then also have The Gay Science, which is of course famous for his God is Dead claim. But Nietzsche is fascinating to me for a variety of reasons, but what I'll say is I feel like he does have that magnum opus of Thus Spoke Zarathustra, but it's not my favorite of his, and I think for a lot of people, if you go and like try and start with that, it's very confusing. It's written in a very fascinating or strange way, I should say, because it's written through the perspective of a fictional character, Zarathustra, so it can be hard to get the big picture perspective and ideas from Nietzsche. But when you kind of read all of his works, which fortunately they're quite short, I think most of his works are only like 150 to 300 pages, that way you get a much better and clear idea of who Nietzsche is and the arguments he's trying to put forth and the criticisms he makes. With all of that said, excited to read both of these, and I also have a project planned for the channel coming in November, where I plan to read a lot of Nietzsche's works. I don't want to spoil it too much, but I'll have a post about it in early October, so ideally you guys can read along with me. We can have a great time. But with all that said, stock up on your Nietzsche books, and I'm excited to dig more into one of my favorites. Another book I picked up, and here's where I can tell you how my life has changed a little bit. My perspective towards reading and my taste has changed. I used to believe that literature and fictional stories were just for entertainment, that they were, valuable, but they were, they were fun. They didn't teach you that much. They were just fun. I was so wrong. I'm so wrong. After reading plenty of Dostoevsky, Kafka, other works, I realized that is a dumb approach. There is so much you can gather from literature, from fiction, and there's a couple points I would make to argue this, and the most salient being that you learn a lot through these characters, through their struggles, through the plots and the heartbreak and the suffering that these characters go through. You learn a lot through these different points of views, perspectives, and cultures that get intertwined within the stories. The other being that you learn a lot of new words. You can learn a lot through the different vocabulary that you get in a fictional story. And personally, I've been spending a lot more time in my dictionary. I made a video on this channel about this, but the more words, the more I can broaden out my lexicon, I think the better I could be. I could be a better writer, I could be a better speaker, I can make better videos, be a better conversationalist, all of that. So that's always great. And lastly, a lot of these books have philosophical undertones. Dostoevsky's an obvious one for his existential values, Kafka as well, but any of these writers that are fictional, even if it's the fantasy that my wife reads and enjoys, there's something to take away from that and apply to real life. So I've been wrong about literature. I don't know why I had that dumb attitude, but I've changed. So lately I picked up some more literature, including Crime and Punishment, and then I picked up a more modern writer who actually just passed away, I believe about a month ago. I think he's known as one of the greatest American writers, Cormac, McCarthy, and I got Blood Meridian to start with. He's also famous for No Country for Old Men and The Road, which have been turned into movies. But I've heard a lot about Blood Meridian. I didn't really know where to start with Cormac McCarthy, but I was like, let's jump in here. From what I know, he writes a lot of Westerns. They're very bloody and brutal. So I'm looking forward to this book. It's about 360 pages. It's again from a more modern writer. So I think that'll be a different perspective, and also in the native language rather than reading a translated version of Dostoevsky or Tolstoy or whoever. So that'll be nice. And then the last book I'll mention, although I bought some others, I probably buy too many, as I'm sure you do, is The Will in the World as Representation. The World as Will and I don't like the title. The World as Will and Representation by Schopenhauer. And you also have this amazing cover where it's essentially a profile picture, which I love, and he's got the craziest hair. But I really enjoy Schopenhauer. I think he gets a bad rep for just being super pessimistic and boring and just no fun, but I really enjoyed his I have a book over there that has like a collection of 3 of his books, but I think it's Studies of Pessimism, The Art of Literature, and like essays on life or something like that. But I really enjoy his writing. I think his ideas on suffering being kind of innate in the world and innate in nature, I think it's pretty accurate. I like his discussions on pleasure, on literature, on different writers, German writers of his time. So this is his magnum opus. It comes in 2 volumes, so this is volume 1. It's pretty hefty, so I will get to this probably towards the end of the year, but figured I'd throw it in this video. If any of you guys are Schopenhauer fans, you aren't alone. So that's it for this video. I, again, feel awful about not getting a good, high-quality video out there, but I wanted to give you something, let you know I'm alive, and hopefully we can continue to share different book recommendations and ideas back and forth, because again, that book, Pessoa, I would never have known this book unless you guys commented, so I really do appreciate your recommendations. Leave them in the comments below, and hopefully the recommendations I made today, you add to your list, and you love them, and you come back and you comment, Brock, this was amazing, thank you for telling me. All that to say, appreciate your guys' support, appreciate any likes, subscription, all of that. I definitely have more planned for the channel. I promise I will make time and continue to pump out the high quality content that I want to do for the channel and that you guys deserve. All that to say, appreciate you watching. Would love to hear your input in the comments below. Subscribe if you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.